All right, I think we have all our panelists now, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Tracing Clean Energy from Coast to Coast, How Trailblazers in the States are Making the Case for a Renewable Energy Future. Thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to our panel of guest speakers for taking the time to speak to us today. We have a really exciting discussion ahead of us about our recently released Renewables on the Rise 2021 report, clean energy leadership in the States, and opportunities for continued action. First, I'd like to introduce myself and Environment America. My name is Katie Moffitt. I'm a Clean Energy Associate with Environment America, and I'll be your MC today. Environment America is a national nonprofit that works to build support for and protect clean air, clean water, wildlife and open spaces, clean energy, and a livable climate. As an organization, we're a network of 29 statewide people-powered environmental advocacy organizations with members and supporters in every state. By mobilizing public support to win swift, impactful actions, we build momentum and make tangible improvements in the health of our environment and communities. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick run through of the agenda for today. First, we'll begin with an introduction from Ohana Newman, Senior Director of Environment America's campaign for 100% renewable energy. She'll kick us off and provide a quick overview of the findings, key findings from Renewables on the Rise 2021 that Environment America Research and Policy Center released on Tuesday. Afterwards, our speakers will have a few minutes to introduce themselves and their clean energy work, and then we'll transition into a moderated discussion about clean energy progress in the States. Finally, we'll have time for some Q&A where audience members will have the opportunity to submit questions for our guest speakers through the Q&A function below. As we proceed with the discussion, feel free to pop those questions into the Q&A tab so we have those ready to ask our speakers at the end. And with that, I'd like to introduce Ohana Newman, Senior Director of Environment America's campaign for 100% renewable energy. Over the course of nearly 20 years with Environment America and our partner organizations, Ohana has raised millions to fund ambitious campaigns, helped pass some of the strongest energy efficiency laws in the country, protected public health by leading campaigns to ban smoking in public establishments, and helped to halt the construction of new nuclear reactors. And now I'll hand it off to Ohana.
Thanks so much, Katie. Really appreciate being here. So again, my name is Ohana Newman. I'm the Senior Director of Environment America's campaign for 100% renewable energy. And when I think about the future that we're trying to build for our children and our grandchildren, it is a world where the way that we produce and consume energy has a vanishingly small impact on our natural world. In this vision, our energy systems, really like those found in nature, are efficient and elegant and restorative. Now, we have a long way to go to reach that vision. Today, the vast majority of our energy still comes from dirty and dangerous sources that harm our health and our environment when we mine them, when we drill for them, when we burn them, and when we dispose of the wastes from those processes. But thankfully, the solutions are at our fingertips. And the obstacles to a future powered by 100% renewable energy are not physical obstacles. Instead, they are challenges of imagination and challenges of commitment. And let me explain what I mean by that. So on the slide that you can see, in the lower right-hand corner, you will see a small white circle that's outlined in red. And that circle visually represents how much electricity our entire country consumed last year. All the other circles on the slide represent the technical potential of different renewable energy technologies. And so by looking at the little green circle, you can see that offshore wind alone could repower our entire country. And rooftop solar, when we maximize it, can also have a huge role to play. And comprehensively, this image, which comes from our report, We Have the Power, shows that the United States has the ability to produce 100 times as much electricity from the sun as we use each year, and 10 times as much electricity from the wind alone. Every single state in our nation could produce more electricity from renewables than it needs in any given year. And so that should give us all hope that this transition to clean energy is something we can absolutely do. And thankfully, the transition to a clean and renewable future is already well underway. We do still have a long ways to go, but I want to just share a few highlights from the new report Environment America Research and Policy Center put out this week called Renewables on the Rise 2021. And on this slide, it just shows the key national trends. And I think the trend is really clear. As you can see in the top two figures, wind and solar growth over the past decade has skyrocketed. And 20 years ago, when the Twin Towers fell, America got 0.5% from its electricity from the wind and solar and geothermal energy. Today, 20 years later, more than 12% of our electricity comes from the wind, the sun, and the earth. We have a long way to go, but we have made real progress. And then the bottom two figures in this slide show that the progress we've seen on clean energy isn't just limited to power production. These bottom figures show that we've made real strides in growing electric vehicles and real strides in growing energy storage. And we've also made tremendous improvements in energy efficiency and using the energy we produce more wisely. And every single one of those technologies is going to be key to making sure clean, renewable energy can power every aspect of our lives 24/7. The last key finding that I want to share from this report is that the progress on renewable energy has not been limited by region or by political background. In fact, states across the country are seeing renewables boom because they just make sense. And this year, our Renewables on the Rise report featured dashboards for each state. And I really encourage you to go to environmentamerica.org and check out your state's dashboard. I'm going to walk through just a couple of them here. So on this slide, you can see that Georgia is one of the top 10 states in the country for growing solar, thanks in part to cities that are leading the way and helping it succeed locally, like Savannah, the mayor of whom is joining us on today's webinar. On the next slide, you'll see that Massachusetts, which still stands out as a solar leader, is also among the leading states for growing energy storage and for improving energy efficiency. And then in Pennsylvania, in addition to seeing real growth in wind energy, Pennsylvania added more than 31,000 electric vehicles over the past decade, which has put it 13th in the country for EV sales. So those dashboards are very cool and very accessible way for you to see how your states are measuring up in terms of clean and renewable energy. And beyond the dashboards this year, we also created a state horse race animation that shows how states are competing when it comes to progress on clean energy. So I'm going to ask Wade to go ahead and start this horse race, and we're just going to watch how clean energy has grown. You'll see at the top here, California is still leading the charge, but here comes Texas. And now Texas has actually beaten California in terms of clean energy adoption. Iowa and California are jockeying for third, with Iowa actually surpassing California. But then California got serious about solar again, and here they come, charging into second place. And that is exactly where California is positioned now in 2020. Texas is leading the country when it comes to renewable energy deployment. California is second, Iowa is third, and Oklahoma is fourth. A couple of key things about Texas. They have added more wind and more solar than any state since 2011. Wind power in Texas tripled over that time period, and the Lone Star State produces now fully 1 of every 4 electrons from wind energy. And then California was really one of the first states to commit to 100% clean electricity back in 2018, and it has continued to set the pace as a national leader on solar. And there are future leaders out there in the wings. So states like Virginia and Oregon that have already made real strides are now poised to do even more with recent 100% clean electricity commitments on the books in those states. To me, the exciting thing about this clean energy growth is that as adoption spreads, the technologies get better. And as the technologies get better, costs come down, and that creates a virtuous cycle to keep growing clean energy. I'll wrap up by just saying that this work leaves me wildly optimistic. Our report found that if we can keep growing US wind, solar, and geothermal at the same 15% annual rate that we've averaged over the past decade, we'd be on track to meet all of our current electricity needs in this country with renewable energy by 2035. That kind of growth is not going to happen on its own. Supportive policies like renewable energy goals and standards in dozens of states, as well as federal policies like clean energy tax credits, have helped and will continue to help fuel the virtuous cycle to grow clean energy progress. So with that, I'm excited to hear the rest of the panelists, and thank you all again so much for coming.
Thank you, Ohana. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speakers. First up, I'd like to introduce Representative Christopher RABB, member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and original lead sponsor of Go 100% Pennsylvania, a bill that would put the Commonwealth on track to source 100% of its energy needs from renewable resources by 2050. Representative RABB is a longtime champion of environmental issues and has worked closely with our in-state partner, Penn Environment. The floor is Representative RABB.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to be here. And I first want to say, as a member of the Pennsylvania General Assembly, I acknowledge this Commonwealth exists on the tribal lands of the Erie, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Muncie, Shawnee, and Susquehannock. Thank you all for having me. I'm an aggressive tree hugger. I'm at home with the solar roof that's powering my electric vehicle as we speak. We have to walk the talk, and I'm really happy to be surrounded by good troublemakers across the country who understand that public policy on all levels serves an important role as we move towards a 100% renewable future. And we have everything we need right now. We have everything we need. We have the technology, we have the expertise, we have the will of the people. I'm hoping that will translate to the political will collectively. And when I see that wonderful horse race animation of states, a lot of people are shocked to see that Texas is taking the lead. And I'm very competitive in Pennsylvania, but they embrace the resources that they were given and the natural resources they have in Texas, which bigger than coal and oil is wind and solar. And I work on the Energy Supply Task Force with the National Conference of State Legislatures. And I work with what I call energy agnostics, those folks who want all forms of energy domestic to power our grid and to power our homes and businesses. However, I would like to move some of those agnostics to the renewable side, where we leave coal and cracked gas in the rearview mirror of our electric vehicles. And I can be proud to say that my electric vehicle will be charged exclusively from renewable energy. We do have the technology. In fact, even under the Trump administration's Department of Energy, they said that we had 90 to 95% of the technology, or we had the technology, current technology, to get to 90 to 95% of renewable in the foreseeable future. We are under a far more enlightened administration now, where we will have greater resources to expedite all the things we are doing in our respective states to move towards that reality. And I'm representing a state of 13 million where 50 years ago, by a margin of 4-1, the people of Pennsylvania voted to amend our state constitution to explicitly include environmental stewardship. Article 1, Section 27 is a green amendment to our state constitution that embraces environmental stewardship. And as proud as I am to come from only one of 2 states that have sought to codify that into our constitution, if legislatures do not act, then those are hollow words. Well, we are acting. And I'm proud to have introduced and reintroduced twice the Go PA 100 legislation to move us to 100% renewable energy by 2050. But I'll be honest, I think we can do it far sooner, not because I'm an optimist, but because I read and I listen to the experts. And we know that we can get there long before that, but only if we have the political will We have the right people and stakeholders coming together to make this a reality. And I also want to say too, that in embracing this future, it must be in the context of social justice and equity. That we are not seeking to save our planet and our environment for all species except humanity. We are leading with a certain level of self-interest as human beings. We want it to remain habitable and verdant for human beings and all other species. So there is some enlightened self-interest here. And that means that as human beings, we must honor all communities, frontline communities, environmental justice communities, Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, because if we don't embrace that, we don't embrace racial justice, social justice, all of these things, then these efforts are for naught. And I know that my colleagues on this call and all the people who are doing this work understand that imperative. We have to lean into these difficult conversations. We have to understand that environmentalism has not always been as inclusive as it should. But in this moment, in this day, when we talk about environmental justice, when we talk about energy policy that embraces all, we understand our potential to do everything we must do because there is no planet B.
Thank you, Representative Rabb. Next, we're joined by Mayor Van Johnson from the city of Savannah, Georgia, who recently led the charge to commit Savannah to 100% renewable electricity by 2035. During his tenure as mayor, he has worked to launch Solarize Savannah, a community-based group purchasing program for clean energy that helped homeowners and businesses repower with solar energy at a lower cost. As a leader on clean energy in Georgia, Mayor Johnson has recently spoken about climate change and Savannah's clean energy efforts at the Climate Mayor Summit Panel, Innovate for Cities 2021 Conference, and the Georgia Climate Conference. Mayor Johnson has worked alongside Environment Georgia to fight the gas industry's efforts to limit local government's abilities to reduce fossil fuel use in buildings. I'll turn it over to you, Mayor Johnson.
Thank you so much, Ms. Moffitt. I appreciate the opportunity, and to Representative Rabb, Representative Dekker, to Joanna Newman, to all of you, thank you so much for the opportunity, and greetings from beautiful Savannah, Georgia, that you should try to visit as soon as you get a chance, because it is a beautiful day. And I am probably pretty new on this environment, climate change spectrum, and I kind of got buoyed into it. And as the wave came, I just been riding the wave. Savannah unanimously passed a 100% renewable energy goal by in March of 2020. So that was literally 2 months into my first term, and literally days before the 20-month sense of the pandemic. And our goal had really two essential parts. One, 100% renewable electricity community-wide by 2035, and then 100% renewable energy for space heating, transportation, and industry community-wide by 2050. And so this resolution was really community-driven. And our community said, hey, this is something that we want. And so the benefit I had was the research had already been done. We already had the environment superheroes right here in Savannah ready to go. We've already had a sustainability director in person of Nick Deffley, who was already on this. So all you needed is just leadership to kind of come and take on this challenge, and we did. The city has a responsibility to our citizens for health and safety, particularly the health and safety of the underserved and younger citizens who will be disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. The clear scientific consensus regarding climate change and humans' role in it. Savannah's unique risk, including, as you know, we're a coastal community, which is beautiful when it's good and it's bad when it's bad. So flooding, stronger hurricanes, rising temperatures, and our opportunity to increase the resilience and prosperity of our city through renewable energy, energy savings, and job creation. And so when you think about where we are, we're already feeling and seeing these effects of climate change. So people ask why? Well, coastal flooding here at Fort Pulaski, which is a little down the road, which is our closest weather station, has increased from an average of 26 in the 1960s to 152 in the 2010s. Extreme heat between 1970 and 2017, the number of 90+ degree days in Savannah increased 39% from 66 to 92. And by 2050, science have estimated that will go from 92 to 117 unless emissions decline significantly. So what are we doing about it? The 100% Clean Energy Plan is a way to get there. Several months of community engagement. We're almost finished with our 100% Savannah Clean Energy Plan. And this plan is a roadmap for us to get to where we want to be for achieving new energy goals with equity in mind. And specific strategies include investment in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean transportation, job training to create a just transition for workers and new opportunities for unemployed and underemployed citizens, educational outreach to the community with specific emphasis on frontline and fence line communities. And then we have several new initiatives underway. We're converting the city fleet to EVs and investing in charging infrastructure, community-led solarized campaign with the city of Atlanta to make solar more affordable for the community, including specific efforts to make solar accessible for low and moderate income families. And of course, a request for proposal to put solar on city facilities. And so we're hoping and we're looking forward to getting there. We are very happy. We had the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, here in Savannah a couple of weeks ago, and we were really excited about that. We had with her Senator John Ossoff, who's been doing some wonderful things, particularly if we can get this bill passed in Congress. It includes two provisions for solar. One, to create a supply chain in America for solar. Right now, we don't have that. And so we're able to create a supply chain where solar is completely manufactured in America. That's a really good thing. The second thing is, once that's done, we have to make it affordable for John Q. Public, like me. So I can get me a solar house and we can have it on more rooftops and I can get my solar car. Representative, I really like the idea of a solar car, but right now, the way my pocket is set up, I'm just not there yet. But I'm excited about Savannah's efforts in this regard. It really bothered me that Savannah, Georgia, was not in the dog race at all. We were not in the dog race at all. So we might have to extrapolate Savannah from that and ultimately just put, California, Texas, Savannah, and then we just have to run our own race. But we're hoping to lead here on the coast and certainly lead here in Georgia. We believe that Georgia can lead the country. We believe Savannah can lead Georgia. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. Now we'll hear from Representative Marjorie Dekker, member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, representing the 25th Middlesex District. Since joining the legislature in 2012, Representative Dekker has been a fierce advocate for environmental protection and has helped work to build powerful coalitions. As a close partner of our in-state affiliate, Environment Massachusetts, Representative Dekker co-sponsored the 100% Clean Act, which would repower Massachusetts with 100% clean electricity by 2035, and is here to speak to us about that effort today. Thank you for joining us, Representative Dekker. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that, right? Still not getting the whole virtual.
I know.
I was saying that I had a presentation prepared, but I'm going to go off script a little bit because I'm so inspired by Representative RABB and Mayor Van Johnson. It's really an honor to be on this webinar with them and to hear their energy and their passion. So I want to thank them for the work that they're doing, because we actually know that whenever a city, and as a former city councilor for 14 years, Mayor, I know this is true, cities often lead the way for states and the rest of the nation to follow. But we also know that when states lead the way, so does the country, right? So we are all in really important positions to not only impact our communities and our states, but really to impact the country. And, you know, something that Representative Mayor Van Johnson, what you talked about is when I was a city councilor, unlike Representative RABB, who, you know, holds on to the title of tree hugger, I was not a tree hugger. And I used to say that if you're looking for someone who's going to go talk to, who's going to like go hug the trees, I would go point them to another counselor, and it wasn't me. I'd say, but if you want to talk about poverty, and you want to talk about immigration, and you want to talk about racism, I'm the person to come talk to. And then it was this epiphany that I had, knowing that the communities that are at the greatest risk of climate damage, right? The vulnerabilities are often communities that I've been fighting for my whole life. I grew up in public housing in my community. I'm the first to graduate from high school. So I have always had a lens of economic and social justice. And the truth is, Representative RABB, I think you said this, that early on, the leaders of the environmental movement, before we were even referencing climate change, were not leaders that I identified with, quite honestly. We might have looked the same, but it was not a community that I identified with. And it wasn't until I really understood this incredible intersection and this recognition that if I did not lean into becoming more of a champion and really become more educated around environmental changes and the climate changes, that I could not actually fully advocate for communities that I believe I've spent my life actually standing in and with and advocating for change. And so that was really my introduction into understanding the importance of becoming more less of a bystander and more of a leader. And, you know, we have a famous senator who likes to say, there is no emergency room for our planet. And so I am really honored that a lot of the work that I have done has been about really trying to call out the injustices, both the economic, social, and political injustices, and what inertia really does for us, and the additional cost, quite frankly, that it costs our communities and it costs our states. Because in fact, we know that climate change has a direct impact on our health. It has a direct impact on where we can live. It has a direct impact on infectious disease, on extreme weather. I mean, all of these things, the people who have to pay for this first are the most economically and politically vulnerable communities in our city. And the truth is, cities are the first to have to pay for those costs, right? Municipalities actually have to and pay and respond to climate damage before anyone else does. And then legislators have to fight really hard to get additional resources for their communities, particularly when they're underserved. So often, you know, when I'm in circles around advocates around environmental and climate change, we talk about environmental justice and environmental justice communities. But I always like to remind people what we're really talking about is communities that have traditionally and systemically been underserved, which are not coincidentally low-income communities and predominantly communities of color and immigrants, right? And so those are the communities that are the least resourced and end up actually having to need more resources because of the impact of climate change. And I think we do not talk enough about the additional stress, the mental health stress that this has on communities, right? Knowing that you're dealing with respiratory disease, that your child is dealing with respiratory disease, and there's direct links to living in poverty and to climate change and to sickness. All of these are additional costs that families are led to believe that it's their own individual cost to bear. The burden that somehow this is just about them not being able to meet the needs of their families, when in fact, it is collectively, we are allowing the fossil fuel industry to knowingly actually create systems that pollute and make us sick. But then once again, the costs fall onto the communities that are the least prepared and the least resourced to respond to that. So I'll get into a little bit about some of the bills that I have filed and just talk to you a little bit about sort of what they do. A bill that I've been working on now for 6 years, and we've been making incremental change and demanding and getting more of a demand on renewable energies in our own grid in Massachusetts. But I can tell you, for me, an example of this bill, it's renewable energy bill. It's really trying to push our state so that we are all really seeking our energy from renewable energy with deadlines that we have laid out. But it's for me, what brought me, when I first filed this bill, I'll be honest, I thought it was a conversation starter. And then we started seeing the impacts around the country, and I was looking at who was being impacted greatly. And that was, again, I thought I was already awoke. This actually awoke in me even more, right? When I was looking at what was happening in Florida, what was happening in Louisiana, what was happening in Mississippi, in Georgia, in Puerto Rico. And then I also really looked more closely at the bill that I was initially invited to file. So I will be clear, often as legislators, we work hand in hand with advocates that we trust, and we will take the bill that they sent to us and say, well, that sounds good, I'm going to file it. Well, I can tell you the second time I filed this bill, it was not the same bill that it was the first time. And because the first time, it really put all of the financial burden onto individual homeowners to adapt to renewable energy. And that is not economically equitable. And so we've actually built into this, we've baked into this bill a trust that actually supports families in transitioning. It also, I needed us to do more in really looking at the economic impacts of the workforce that would be impacted by renewable energy. You know, I realized early on that a lot of my friends in the environmental community would talk about green new jobs with a lot of excitement. And I share that excitement for growing a greener economy, but it was not apples to apples. When you talk about somebody who's going to lose their job, whose job is related to either a pipeline or fossil fuels, it is not apples to apples in terms of the wages and the benefits and the retirement benefits, most of them that have actually been negotiated through collective bargaining and won over decades of fighting for workers' rights. And so for me, it was really important that what we would bake into this bill is a recognition that just transition really needs to actually involve the workforce that is the most deeply impacted. And so I started holding conversations, and these were small conversations. They were awkward and they were tense for a while with my friends who were in the building trades and my friends who were in the environmental community. And it was really powerful to have conversations where the folks who might actually disagree with how to get from A to B could start talking to each other and actually have it was not a high stakes conversation, because these conversations weren't taking place on the side of the chamber floor where a vote was about to take place. These were like, we need to get to know each other and let's actually work through what makes sense and why it doesn't. And then if we can't agree, at least we know we don't agree right now. But more often than not, actually, they were constructive conversations. And I have to tell you, I was really proud to then work closely with the building trades and with the AFL-CIO in Massachusetts, who then brought to their convention, and it was actually delivered by the business manager of IBEW 103. He brought the nomination to the floor to create a just transition committee of the AFL. This is like all months before like COVID really hit us. And to be in a room with hundreds and hundreds of people who care deeply about labor, many who are in the building trades, and to say, okay, we're all going to invest in this conversation, and we're going to do it in a way that recognizes that this train is leaving and it might be solar powered, and we need to make sure that you are in this together. Oh, sorry. Okay, we need to move on. So I haven't even gotten to the bill, but essentially the work around the bill has been just as important as about how do we move Massachusetts. And I'm really excited. Massachusetts is doing a lot in the space of renewable energy. You will hear some really exciting things from us over the winter with offshore wind that is about to really take off here with the leadership of the House Speaker, Ron Mariano. So I just want to say thank you to Environment America, and thank you to my elected colleagues who I'm on this panel with. It really is quite a privilege to be on this with you. And thank you for all your leadership.
Thank you, Representative Dekker. It's really exciting to hear about what's happening in Massachusetts lately. Now let's start with a question for all of the panelists. What inspired you to champion clean energy in your work? Rep Dekker, I know you have to leave soon. Would you like to take this one first?
I think I'll stay on for a little longer. I think I shared it. It really is this awakening of the communities that I've spent my whole life advocating for, in which I come from, were really the ones who were being hit the hardest and becoming the sickest and more economically vulnerable.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'd like to chime in.
Go for it. Go for it. Take it away.
So I call myself a tree hugger, and that's a fairly new title, and I embrace it because that has been used to denigrate those of us who care about the environment. And so I turn it on its face. So before my detractors, make their snide remarks, I embrace it. I do a little jujitsu with the language, and I say I'm a tree hugger, and then I do what I do. And so when I'm able to talk about my entree to this, it's pretty new. But then I realized that I was influenced deeply by my grandmother, who's a community organizer in Baltimore in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And she was neither an environmentalist or a feminist. She was very much about racial justice. And in her community, they're going to put in an incinerator because she lived in a working class Black community. And that's what they thought of Black folk. That's where all the bad stuff goes. And she was mortified, and she fought like hell to make sure that didn't happen. And next door, they're going to put in the community next door, which was all white, a public pool. Now, you know that wasn't for the public, it was for the white public. And access to those public assets were not across the board. It was a segregated reality. And frankly, that segregation still exists today. We have better language, we have more collaboration, but still things are challenging. So when I thought about the work that I seek to do around a just transition, I was inspired by my grandmother's activism in the late 60s, demanding justice. It was simply to protect the health of her neighbors and her babies. And that's what inspires me today. I'm in a state that is the second largest producer of fracked gas, the second largest producer of electricity from nukes, and the second or third largest producer of electricity from coal. This is not sustainable. It's not sustainable from any perspective, economically, environmentally, and not even politically. And it's important for us to tell our stories because whether it's Mayor Johnson or Rep. Dekker or myself, we have different entree points, but we will have the same goals in mind. We have the same priorities from intersecting perspectives, lived experiences, and expertise. And that makes this movement, it respects the diversity of thought and approach that's going to allow us to get the job done.
I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. Savannah is a place of 80,000 trees. We have one of the largest tree canopies in the country. So Rep. RABB, come whenever you want to and hug as many trees as you want. But I think for us, the challenge here and the opportunity is that when you think about what you leave behind, when we are all being talked about in the past tense, really all we have to leave behind is our environment. And so we're talking about an everlasting gift that we leave our earth better than what we found it. And so for Savannah, we've learned how coastal Georgia has become a problem as it relates to climate change. We have sea level rises, we have more flooding, we have increasingly intense hurricanes. I mean, thank God over the last 2 years, we have not experienced a hurricane. Although the 2 years before that, we evacuated in both of those years. And as you know, our friends down in the Gulf have been hammered. Fortunately for us, because of our pandemic, I mean, if we were able, we were evacuated, we really had nowhere to go. And we know that left unchecked, climate change costs us land, it costs us money, and it costs us lives. And back to what Rep. RABB was just saying as it relates to poverty is that we know it disproportionately affects those that have problems paying it in the first place. So as energy bills go up, the ones who are affected the most are the ones who can least afford to pay it. And so, and these are Black and brown people, but really it's people who have a lack of green. So the clean energy transition will offer opportunities for us to reduce energy burdens and create family sustaining jobs that do not require a college degree. I think that's important to be able to say. And I think that the clear scientific consensus is that climate change is happening and you have to be living under a rock to know that it is not happening. I mean, it is happening. And so it is happening in places that's never happened before, and it's happening worse in places that it has happened before, and that is caused by human activities, and it will harm us in our way of life. So therefore, if human activities are causing it, it's going to take significant human activities to be able to reverse it.
Great, thank you, Mayor Johnson. Our next question is for Representative RABB. Speaking from your experience working across the aisle to transition Pennsylvania to 100% renewable energy, how can we leverage bipartisan collaboration to further clean energy progress across the country?
Oh, that's real easy. You put a wind farm in a Republican's backyard, and when they become the biggest employer in that district and they produced family sustaining jobs, their tune is going to start changing, right? At the end of the day, electeds like to take credit for creation of jobs. Now, we may do that indirectly, but we rarely do it ourselves. But we sure as heck like to amplify folks who are creating good family sustaining jobs, particularly when it's in our own district, in our own municipality, state, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you see that there are stakeholders who are doing what we're talking about, and they're producing results that everyone likes, that is going to influence the voting record and the priorities of people in power. Now, I want to put this in perspective because it's a great question. In Pennsylvania, there are no campaign contribution limits. So that means that there are more fossil fuel lobbyists cutting big checks to my colleagues. Somehow they don't send me checks, but they send a lot of checks to other folks because they know I'm a tree hugger and it'd be a waste of money. But the reason they have that influence is because it's unchecked and it is unlimited. But the thing that will be of greater influence than those large campaign donors and those PACs and lobbyists are when positive things that are happening in their backyard. So not surprisingly, some of my most conservative Republican colleagues in Texas are loving renewables. Why? Because Texas is kicking butt on that level, as we've seen through the animation. That will influence. So all the things you think are associated with one party or another are highly related to things that are happening in their backyard. You're going to see a lot of Republicans support hemp who are from Kentucky. Duh, right? So this is what we're going to see. So if you're able to have an influence on people making decisions about what is happening on the ground with regard to renewable energy in those areas where there are people whose politics are not aligned with a lot of folks on this call, then that will change. And you have to believe it. And one of the best examples too is, and this is a more acute personal example, there are people who are very anti a particular issue, whatever it may be, until it happens to someone in their family. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, this is wrong because it happened to someone in my family or happened to someone I care about. So I'm going to change my views because it happened to someone in my family. And we can say that that's very narrow-minded, that's very self-serving, but we're all human beings. We need to tap into that self-interest and say, let's look at the projects that are happening that promote renewable energy, a sustainable economy, green collar jobs, and see how we can populate those projects in areas that are maybe politically inhospitable and see what kind of influence that has on the electeds. And I assure you, over time and through collaboration on the ground, it will pay off because I work with a number of those folks from across the aisle who are benefiting financially, economically, and otherwise from those projects.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have a question from Mayor Johnson. How can cities grow support for and generation of renewable energy absent supportive state level clean energy policies? Oh no, you're muted.
The first thing is to invite us to these sessions in person and not do them on Zoom anymore. I think that's one of the first things the cities can do. But I think we have to let the market do the talking. You know, the consensus is that solar and wind are the cheapest new energy sources that we have today. And so that's why solar is shining in Congress, even when policy support isn't there. A second thing is creativity and partnership. That we have to, our Solar Rise campaign is through a partnership with the city of Atlanta, which is about 247 miles away, and advocacy groups from across the state, like Environment Georgia. And these partnerships allow for creative solutions that advance solar even when the policy environment is a barrier. As an example, Savannah and the other members of the Solar Rise cohort were able to work together to develop an inclusive financing model that will help us and help us to help low and moderate income families access federal tax credits that they otherwise could not. And then finally, the continuing education and leadership. While solar is growing in Savannah, we have a long way to go. And though policy is a piece of the challenge, the broader challenge is the lack of education and awareness as it relates to what solar actually is and really how it works. This city hopes to address this by putting solar on our buildings first, and then using this as an opportunity really to teach the community from ground one about what solar is and what it can do for us. And I think there is even now young people, what we teach them is what they will know. And so we raise them with an appreciation for the environment. I remember I was always told, you know, when you leave a room, you turn the lights off. Well, we can do the same for young people as it relates to solar. When they grow up and they recognize that solar and wind is as easy as their ABCs, then we have also growing our own bench of young people who are environmentally minded and ready to take on what we leave for them.
Thank you, Mary Johnson. Next question I have is for Ohana. I feel like it's important to think about the context for this conversation that we're having right now. Your Congress is in the middle of deliberations over the Build Back Better Act, which includes federal clean energy tax incentives, among other clean energy initiatives. What impact would these tax credits have on clean energy growth in America?
Thanks for the question. It is kind of the question of the day today in some ways. There is no doubt that the clean energy credits that Congress has authorized in the past have played a key role in putting solar and other clean energy technologies in the reach of more Americans. Certainly more than any other federal policy, the clean energy tax credits have helped kind of bring renewables to scale in America. What Congress is considering now in the Build Back Better Act is whether to take those known, proven policies of these clean energy credits and extend them for the next decade at levels that could truly, I mean, in the name of a researcher who I was recently talking to, he said, Ohana, you think clean energy has grown in the past decade? If we pass these 10-year extensions, 5 years from now, it's going to be a totally different conversation. The tax credits in the Build Back Better Act truly have the potential to be a game changer to grow clean energy in America. So certainly we are doing everything we can at Environment America, which is our legislative arm, to make sure that Congress sees the Build Back Better Act through and that the tax credits are in there fully funded for the next 10 years. It would be truly transformative and monumental for clean energy in America.
Great, thank you, Ohana. This next question is for Oliver, it's for Rep. Dekker. If passed, the 100% Clean Act would be the strongest statewide clean energy law in the country. How do you anticipate that the 100% Clean Act might impact and influence other state efforts to transition to 100% renewable energy? And why do you think it's important for a state like Massachusetts to set such an ambitious example?
I think it's important, you know, I'm from Massachusetts and we always like to think that we're important for a lot of reasons. But the truth is it's important when any state in this country makes incredible strides, and other states have made huge strides that I have used to really leverage and put pressure on Massachusetts, whether it's California, New Mexico, Colorado. I mean, there's just other states that are doing, and understanding all of our states have different sources of energy that become, you know, I think you can't compare every state, right? Because it's just, there's a difference of how we power our lives, you know, and where that is sourced from. So It's important for all of our states to do this, and certainly that what happens whenever Massachusetts can accomplish something, we become a tool for other states to learn from our best practices, right? And I just think that that is true regardless of which state is doing it. Anytime, and you know, going back to even the municipalities, when municipalities either become impatient with state government and stop waiting for us to get out of our own way, they just do it. And as a city councilor for 14 years, I just did it. And I am really proud that I was able to actually impact state government. And then I ran for the state legislature, you know, 10 years ago, because I wanted to be part of being able to impact other states. When Massachusetts can model what does it look like to move forward, and in this case on renewable energy. So it is really important for every state, and it is important in Massachusetts because this is where I am and it's where I represent. And I do think when we show that there is a clear cost benefit, right? I mean, we're even beyond sort of, does it make good financial sense, or is it the fiduciary responsibility we have to even, you know, many of our pension systems, it's become very clear. It's actually financially reckless to continue powering our lives on fossil fuels and not moving to renewable energy. But the good news is also we know that in addition to it being the most financially viable path right now, we also know the importance of the public health urgency that it, you know, climate change is a public health issue. And as the chair of the public health committee in the legislature, it becomes even more important to me that we lead the way. We understand that for every day we delay this systemic big changes is another day that people will get sick, they will lose their economic security, they will lose their homes, and they will lose their health. And so for all of those reasons.
And then if I can just chime in here real quick, because I think even if global warming weren't a problem, transitioning to renewable energy would still make sense. You know, there's no doubt carbon emissions are the elephant in the room, but there are all these other problems associated with how we currently get our energy, right? The water pollution, the air pollution, you know, it's making our kids sick, and there's no need for it anymore. We have the technology and we have the resources to break free from these polluting energy sources. And the sooner we do it, every single one of us is going to breathe easier. And all of our kids, you know, who are currently suffering from asthma are going to have a load lifted. So climate change aside, and no doubt it is an urgent and important issue, but even for somebody who's a climate skeptic, they can embrace a vision of 100% renewable energy because it makes sense for all those other reasons that touch our lives.
Thank you, Johanna. That's a great point. In the last 5 minutes, I'd like to ask a question of all of our guest speakers, which is, what are some of the key lessons learned from your renewable energy advocacy that might serve clean energy leaders across the country aspiring to transition their own states to 100% renewable energy? Let's start with Representative RABB.
That's a key question for me. I serve in the minority where the majority caucus has run the state legislature in both houses for over 30 years, and it has been deeply compromised by fossil fuel lobbyists. But I will say this, even though we may not be as close to these goals as other states that are more enlightened with legislators like Representative Dekker, it's never too early to do the right thing, to do the just thing, to understand that we are on the right side of history and that this is truly an imperative that we must fully embrace with creativity and love. And so even though when we introduce and reintroduce our 100% renewable energy bill, and we know it's not going to move in our legislature this legislative term, we are putting in the work. We are sowing the seeds. And if you think about any other movement that you care about that has come to fruition, then you should be inspired, because so many of these things never happen as quickly as we would like. And as the great-great-grandson of 16 ancestors, all of whom were born into slavery, from as far south as Mississippi to far north as Manhattan, they all died free. And they didn't die free because things just happened. Nothing happened overnight. It was not the stroke of Abraham Lincoln's pen. It was people on the ground fighting for their own freedom and mass liberation. And that's what we're doing. We're seeking to do that for Mother Earth herself. And this will not happen overnight, but literally and figuratively, the wind is to our backs.
Great, thank you. Any of our other speakers want to jump in on this one?
I'll jump in. I think for us, you have to have a simple, clear message. This is confusing stuff, even for tree huggers and people who are so inclined. You can really get caught up in the technology of it all. There's a lot of technical jargon that people don't understand. It's sometimes hard for people to measure. So I think we have to keep it simple, the parts per million and megawatt hours and metric tons. I mean, I failed all of that in school. And so this is really not what it's about. It's about really taking it to common denominators of what people understand. They understand health. They understand what it means to be healthy or not healthy. They know what it means to be safe or not to be safe. They know what it is to be prosperous or be poor. And so we have to keep it very clear, keep it very simple. Second thing we have to do is make sure we're leaving nobody out. That ultimately this should be not just for the rich and famous or those that are well-to-do, that we all have contributed in some way to climate change. So we all will be affected. So we have to all work together to get out of this. And so in this is not just for those who can afford it or those who are interested in it. We have to make it universal that people can take advantage of it and see themselves. As I was saying with with Secretary Granholm coming here, we took her to one of the neighborhoods that, and at the end of the day, if our poorest neighborhoods can't afford it, then it's not going to work for us. We have to make sure everybody has the opportunity to see the benefits of this and to make sure that we are redressing the historical inequities that leave so many people in poverty. We have to acknowledge that we haven't done the right thing always. And so part of that in acknowledging it gives us an opportunity to do better, that we're not going to leave anybody behind. And then we have to focus in on the opportunities. That climate change is not about giving up our way of life. I mean, it's not about that. It is really about creating a new and better way of life that works for everybody. And how do we do that? How do we create jobs? How do we put money back in people's pockets? That's how we are able to kind of stay focused on that. And as long as we're able to do that, we can move as a united country. People all over the place, that in California or Texas, that they see the same benefits as they see here in Savannah. It has to be universal.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. I'm so sorry to say this, but we are out of time. I know. Thank you all for such an engaging and thoughtful discussion. I just want to thank all of our incredible speakers, Representative Dekker, Representative RABB, and Mayor Johnson, Ohana, for taking the time to talk to us today about the important work you're all doing to further the renewable energy transition in your state and at the national level. And thank you to everyone who made this event possible, and to all of you for joining us. We have the link to our new report up on our slides, as well as my contact information. So please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you may have. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take
This
care.
was
Keep
wonderful.
safe.